What's shaking, guys? Hello. Welcome. Welcome to the Left Unread podcast. My name's Cam, and I'm one of your hosts, normally joined by my wonderful friend Evan, who is not here with us today, because I am finishing / re-releasing / remastering a project that I had worked on a little over a year ago. And so some of you might recognize the title of this episode. And so I wanted to do a little explanation here before you dive in, so you realize what it is that you're listening to. So last February, I had the idea to do a reading of the acclaimed 1970 fantasy masterpiece, The Eye of Argon, written by who I believe was a high school student named Jim Thace. And this has, since the 70s, gathered quite a reputation as one of the worst books ever written. And it's really more of a novella, more of a short story. I think there are only 8 chapters, or I don't even know. He's got some of them are half chapters. It's a mess, right? And those of you who listened to the original reading probably can attest to that. So, which was actually a fair number of you. And my initial plan was to split this into a 2-part release. Now, in working on this sort of remastering, re-release project here, I came to realize that, the quote-unquote second half of the Eye of Argon was really like maybe the last third of the story. And so after recording, I didn't feel like I had quite enough to justify 2 episodes out of it. And so what I thought that I would do is take the original audio from a year ago and kind of lightly remaster it, get the levels sounding a little better so it's not quite as clippy and jumpy, and then re-release the entire Eye of Argon as one new numbered episode. Initially, I think I mentioned we released this project as something that wasn't part of our numbered series, and so that's always kind of bothered me. I don't know why I wanted to do that. I think maybe I thought that I would do more of these, and maybe I will, but ultimately I think it makes more sense to be a packaged whole. So I'm going to be taking that original episode off the feed, and I've kind of revisited some of that audio. In that initial episode, there was a little back and forth with Evan and I to kind of pad it out, but a lot of that is sort of old conversation about stuff that's no longer like current or relevant. So I trimmed that out, not because I don't love Evan, but just because, I don't know, it didn't feel like talking about what Donald Trump was up to last February was super vital for listeners right now. So forgive me. But I still have that audio. If for some reason there's like a pressing desire to listen to it, we can discuss that. Anyhow, yeah. So, I really wanted to give credit because it was one person on Twitter who convinced me to revisit this. But it looks like they've deleted their account. So if you are listening, a friend of the show, Anonymous, reach out, because I want to mention that it's really for you, this one specific person, that I'm doing this. And the reason that I want to mention that is because Evan and I are really amenable to ideas and to feedback and stuff. So if there's something that like either we've touched on before and you really feel like you want to hear us talk more about, or like a type of episode that you miss, or just something that you want to hear, let us know, because we like that. That really helps us get our jollies. And it was the easiest thing in the world. Literally, all it took for me to do more Eye of Argon was for one person to be like, "Hey, can you do more Eye of Argon?" So, like, yeah, obviously. And so that leads us to today, where I've got this remastered and re-released full. This is the entirety of The Eye of Argon for your listening pleasure. I hope that you listen to this on your commute or on your walk or at the gym. It's dumb as hell. I don't claim to be any sort of professional audiobook reader. I had a little fun with it. And there are a lot of moments where I'm struggling with, this is riddled with typos. But yeah, so, and also I should note, I used an edition of this on my Kindle, which was published, right? So this book, if you buy this book, it's heavily padded with like copyrighted material, essays about the Eye of Argon, about the story of the Eye of Argon, and all that honestly is a really interesting read. I recommend it because the story of this is fun as well. But I will not be reading all of that on air because that is all copyrighted. The story itself you can find online if you want to read along, or if you want to read it for yourself. I don't know why you would want to do that, but if you do, you can find it. And so, without further ado, let's start the show, and please enjoy my reading, which is a year in the making, of The Eye of Argon by Jim Theus. And I'm not really sure. I'm actually going to look here. Yeah, it doesn't look like this is separated into chapters. So, I guess Jim did not himself see the need for that. So, I'm going to just start. The weather-beaten trail wound ahead into the dust-racked climes of the barren land which dominates large portions of the Norgolian Empire. Age-worn hoofprints smothered by the sifting sands of time shone dully against the dust-splattered crust of the earth. The tireless sun cast its parching rays of incandescence from overhead, halfway through its daily revolution. Small rodents scampered about, occupying themselves in the daily accomplishments of their dismal lives. Dust sprayed over 3 heaving mounts in blinding clouds, while they bore the burdensome cargoes of their struggling overseers. This is wild. This is insane. "Prepare to embrace your creators in the Stygian haunts of hell, barbarian," gasped the first soldier. "Only after you have kissed the fleeting stead of death, wretch," returned Grigner. A sweeping blade of flashing steel riveted from the massive barbarian's hide-enameled shield as his rippling right arm thrust forth, sending a steel-shod blade to the hilt into the soldier's vital organs. The disemboweled mercenary crumpled from his saddle and sank to the clouded sward, sprinkling the parched dust with crimson droplets of escaping life fluid. The enthused barbarian swiveled about, his shock of fiery red hair tossing robustly in the humid air currents as he faced the attack of the defeated soldier's fellow-in-arms. "Damn you, barbarian!" shrieked the soldier as he observed his comrade in death. A gleaming scimitar smote a heavy blow against the renegade's spiked helmet, bringing a heavy cloud over the accordion's misting brain. Shaking off the effects of the pounding blow to his head, Grigner brought down his scarlet-streaked edge against the soldier's crudely forged hauberk, clanging harmlessly to the left side of his opponent. The soldier's steed, he wrote stead, whinnied as he directed the horse back from the driving blade of the barbarian. Grigner leashed his mount forward as the hoarsely piercing battle cry of his wilderness-bred race resounded from his grinding lungs. A twirling blade bounced harmlessly from the mighty thief's buckler as his rolling right arm cleft upward, sending a foot of blinding steel ripping through the Cimmerian's exposed gullet. A gasping gurgle from the soldier's writhing mouth as he tumbled to the golden sand at his feet and wormed agonizingly in his deathbed. Jesus. Grigner's emerald green orbs glared lustfully at the wallowing soldier struggling before his chestnut-swirled mount. His scowling voice reverberated over the dying form in a tone of mocking mirth. "You city-bred dogs should learn not to antagonize your better." Reining his weary mount ahead, Grigner resumed his journey to the Noragolian... I don't know. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't know if he's... I think he has forgotten how to spell... Whatever. The Noragolian city of Gorzam, hoping to discover wine, women, and adventure to boil the wild blood coursing through his savage veins. The trek to Gorzam was forced upon Grigner when the soldiers of Kryn were unleashed upon him by a faithless concubine he had wooed. His scandalous activities throughout the Cimmerian city had unleashed throngs of havoc and uproar among its refined patricians, leading them to tack a heavy reward over his head. He had barely managed to escape through the back entrance of the inn he had been guzzling in as a squad of soldiers pounced upon him. After spilling a spout of blood from the leader of the mercenaries as he dismembered one of the officer's arms, he retreated to his mount to make his way towards Gorzam, rumored to contain hoards of plunder and many young wenches for any man who has the backbone to wrest them away. And I lied. It looks like it is spread into chapters. That was the conclusion of Chapter 1. And we will now commence with Chapter 2. Arriving after dusk in Gorzam, Grigner descended upon a dismal alley, reining his horse before a beaten tavern. The red-haired giant strode into the dimly lit hostelry, reeking of foul odors and cheap wine. The air was heavy with choking fumes spewing from smoldering torches, one word, encased within Thedan's earthen-packed walls. The den's earthen-packed walls. Tables were clustered with groups of drunken thieves and cutthroats, tossing dice or making love to willing prostitutes. Eyeing a slender female crouched alone at a nearby bench, Grigner advanced, wishing to wholesomely occupy his time. That's fucking awesome. I am gonna now refer to coitus as a wholesome occupation of time. The flickering torches cast weird shafts of luminescence dancing over the half-naked harlot of his choice, her stringy orchid twines of hair swaying gracefully over the lithe, opaque nose, as she raised a half-drained mug to her pale red lips. Glancing upward, the alluring complexion noted the stalwart giant as he rapidly approached. A faint glimmer sparked from the pair of deep blue ovals of the amorous female as she motioned toward Grigner, enticing him to join her. The barbarian seated himself upon a stool at the wench's side, exposing his body, naked save for a loincloth, brandishing a long steel broadsword, an iron-spiraled battle helmet, and a thick leather sandals to her unobstructed view. "Thou hast need to occupy your time, barbarian?" questioned the female. "Only if something worth offering is within my reach," stated Grigner, as his hands crept to embrace the tempting female who welcomed them with open willingness. "From where do you come, barbarian, and by what are you called?" gasped the complying wench, as Grigner smothered her lips with the blazing touch of his flaming mouth. The engrossed Titan ignored the queries of the inquisitive female, pulling her towards him and crushing her sagging nipples to his yearning chest. Without struggle, she gave in, winding her soft arms around the harshly bronzed hide of Grigner corded shoulder blades, as his calloused hands caressed her firm, protruding busts. "You make love well, wench," admitted Grigner as he reached for the vessel of potent wine his charge had been quaffing. A flying foot caught the mug Grigner had taken hold of, sending its blood-red contents sloshing over a flickering crescent, leashing tongues of bright orange flame to the foot-trodden floor. "Remove yourself, sirrah! The wench belongs to me," blabbered a drunken soldier, too far consumed by the influences of his virile brew to take note of the superior size of his adversary. Grigner lithely bounded from the startled female, his face lit up to an ashen-red ferocity, and eyes locked in a searing, feral blaze towards the swaying soldier. "To hell with you, braggart!" bellowed the angered accordion as he hefted his finely honed broadsword. The staggering soldier clumsily reached towards the pommel of his dangling sword, but before his hands ever touched the oaken hilt, a silvered flash was slicing the heavy air. The thews of the savage's lashing right arm bulged. The thews? What the fuck are those? The thews of the savage's lashing right arm bulged from the glistening bronzed hide as his blade bit deeply into the soldier's neck, loping off the confused head of his senseless tormentor. Side note here. I'm doing my best to read phonetically from what's written here. So don't read too far into anything that sounds like a non-existent word or a mispronunciation on my part. I'm trying to faithfully recreate the material for you guys. With a nauseating thud, the severed oval toppled to the floor. This guy really loves describing body parts as like shapes, orbs and ovals and stuff. As the segregated torso of Grigner's bovine antagonist swayed, then collapsed in a pool of swirled crimson. In the confusion, the soldiers' fellows confronted Grigner with unsheathed cutlasses directed towards the latter's scowling makeup. "The slut should have picked his quarry more carefully," roared the victor, in a mocking baritone growl, as he wiped his dripping blade on the prostrate form and returned it to its scabbard. "The fool should have shown more prudence. However, you shall rue your actions while rotting in the pits," stated one of the sprawled soldier's comrades. Grigner's hand began to remove his blade from its leather housing, but retarded the motion in face of the blades waving before his face. "Dismiss your hand from the hilt, barbarian, or you shall find a foot of steel sheathed in your gizzard." Grigner weighed his position, observing his plight, whereupon he took the soldier's advice as the only logical choice. To attempt to hack his way from his present predicament could only warrant certain death. He was of no mind to bring upon his own demise if an alternate path presented itself. The will to necessitate his life forced him to yield to the superior force in hopes of a moment of carelessness later upon the part of his captors, in which he could effect a more plausible means of escape, which, frankly, is very smart of Grigner. "You may steady your arms. I will go without a struggle." "Your decision is a wise one, yet perhaps you would have been better off had you faced death." The soldier's mouth wrinkled to a sadistic grin of knowing mirth as he prodded his prisoner on with his sword point. After an indiscriminate period of marching through slinking alleyways and dim moonlighted streets, the procession confronted a massive seraglio. Seraglio? The palace area was surrounded by an iron grating, with a lush garden upon all sides. The group was admitted through the gilded gateway, and Grigner was led along a stone pathway, bordered by plush vegetation lustfully enhanced by the moon's shimmering rays. Upon reaching the palace, the group was granted entrance, and after several minutes of explanation, led through several winding corridors to a richly draped chamber. Confronting the group was a short, stocky man seated upon a golden throne. Tapestries of richly draped regal blue silk covered all walls of the chamber, while the steps leading to the throne were plated with sprinkling white ivory. The man upon the throne had a naked wench seated at each of his arms, and a trusted advisor seated in back of him. At each corner of the chamber, a guard stood at attention, with upraised pikes supported in their hands, golden chainmail adorning their torsos, and barred helmets emitting scarlet plumes enshrouding their heads. The man rose from his throne to the dais surrounding it. His plush turquoise robe dangled loosely from his chunky frame. The soldiers surrounding Grigner fell to their knees with heads bowed to the stone masonry of the floor, in fearful dignity to their sovereign liege. "Explain the purpose of this intrusion upon my chateau." "Your Serenity, resplendent in noble grandeur, we have brought this yokel before you," the soldier gestured toward Grigner, "for the redress of your all-knowing wisdom and judgment regarding his fate." "Down on your knees, lout! "And pay proper homage to your sovereign," commanded the pudgy noble of Grigner. "By the surly mark of Mrifk, Grigner kneels to no man." "By the surly beard of Mrifk, Grigner kneels to no man," scowled the massive barbarian. "You dare to deal this blasphemous act to me? You are indeed brave, stranger, yet your valor smacks of foolishness." "I find you to be the only fool, sitting upon your pompous throne, enhancing the rolling flabs of your belly in the midst of your elaborate luxury and—" The soldier standing at Grigner's side smote him heavily in the face with the flat of his sword, cutting short the harsh words and knocking his battered helmet to the masonry with an echoing clang. The paunchy noble's sagging round face flushed suddenly pale, then hastily lit up to a lustrous cherry-red radiance. His lips trembled with malicious rage, while emitting a muffled, sibilant gibberish. His sagging flabs rolled like a tub of upset jelly, then compressed as he sucked in his gut in an attempt to conceal his softness. The prince regained his statue, then spoke to the soldiers surrounding Grigner, his face conforming to an ugly expression of sadistic humor. "Take this uncouth heathen to the vault of misery, and be sure that his agonies are long and drawn out before death can release him." "As you wish, sire. Your command shall be heeded immediately," answered the soldier on the right of Grigner as he stared into the barbarian's seemingly unaffected face. The advisor seated in the back of the noble slowly rose and advanced to the side of his master, motioning the wenches seated at his sides to remove themselves. He lowered his head and whispered to the noble. "Eminence, the punishment you have decreed will cause much misery to this scum, yet it will last only a short time, then release him to a land beyond the sufferings of the human body. Why not mellow him in one of the subterranean vaults for a few days, then send him to life labor in one of your buried mines? To one such as he, a life spent in the confinement of the Stygian pits will be an infinitely more appropriate and lasting torture." The noble cupped his drooping double chin in the folds of his briming palm, meditating for a moment upon the rationality of the counselor's words, then raised his shaggy brown eyebrows and turned towards the advisor, eyes aglow. "As always, Agafund, you speak with great wisdom. Your words ring of great knowledge concerning the nature of one such as he, saith the king." I guess he's a king now. The noble turned toward the prisoner with a noticeable shimmer reflecting in his frog-like eyes, and his lips contorting to a greasy grin. "I have decided to void my previous decree. The prisoner shall be removed to one of the palace's underground vaults. There he shall stay until I have decided that he has sufficiently simmered, whereupon he is to be allowed to spend the remainder of his days at labor in one of my mines." Upon hearing this, Grigner realized that his fate would be far less merciful than death to one such as he, who was used to roaming the countryside at will. A life of confinement would be more than his body and mind could stand up to. This type of life would be immeasurably worse than death. "I shall never understand the ways if your twisted civilization. I simply defend my honor and am condemned to life confinement by a pig who sits on his royal ass wooing whores, and knows nothing of the affairs of the land he imagines to rule." Lectures Grigner? That's a weird place for a question mark. "Enough of this. Away with the slut before I lose my control." So this is the second time that this writer has used slut as just like a blanket insult. People are just calling each other sluts willy-nilly in Norgolod, whatever this fucking empire is called. Seeing the peril of his position, Grigner searched for an opening. Crushing prudence to the sword, he plowed into the soldier at his left arm, taking hold of his sword, and bounding to the dais supporting the prince before the startled guards could regain their composure. Agafund leaped Grigner and his sire, but found a sword blade permeating the length of his ribs before he could loose his weapon. The counselor slumped to his knees as Grigner slid his crimsoned blade from Agafund's ribcage. The fat prince stood undulating in insurmountable fear before the edge of the fiery-maned comet, his flabs of jellied blubber pulsating to and fro in ripples of flowing terror. "Where is your wisdom and power now, your majesty?" growled Grigner. The prince went rigid as Grigner, discerning him, glazed over his shoulder. Wow, okay. He swived to note the cause of the noble's attention, raised his sword over his head, and prepared to leash a vicious downward cleft, but fell short as the heft of a steel-rimed pike clashed against his unguarded skull. Then, blackness and solitude. Silence enshrouding and ever peaceful reigned supreme. "Before me, sirrah! Before me as always! Ha! Ha ha! Ha!" Nobly cackled. That's the end of chapter 2. Chapter 3. Consciousness returned to Grigner in stigmatic pools, as his mind gradually cleared of the cobwebs cluttering its inner recesses, yet the Stygian cloud of charcoal ebony remained, an incompatible shield of blackness, enhanced by the bleak absence of sound. Grigner's muddled brain reeled from the shock of the blow he had received to the base of his skull. The events leading to his predicament were slow to filter back to him. He dickered with the notion that he was dead and had descended or sunk, however it may be, to the shadowed land beyond the aperture of the grave, but rejected this hypothesis when his memory sifted back within his grips. This was not the land of the dead. It was something infinitely more precarious than anything the grave could offer. Death promised an infinity of peace, not the finite misery of an inactive life of confirmed torture, forever concealed from the life-bearing shafts of the beloved rising sun. The orb that had been before taken for granted, yet now cherished above all else. Again with the orbs. Orbs and what does he say? Orbs and... I don't remember. To be forever refused further glimpses of the snow-capped summits of the land of his birth, never again to witness the thrill of plundering unexplored lands beyond the crest of a bleeding horizon, and perhaps worst of all, the denial to ever again encompass the lustful excitement of caressing the naked curves of the body of a trim yund wench. This was indeed one of the buried chasms of hell, concealed within the inner depths of the palace's despised interior. A fearful ebony chamber devised to drive to the brinks of insanity the minds of the unfortunately condemned, through the inept solitude of a limbo of listless, dreary silence. That concludes Chapter 3. We are now on to Chapter 3 and a half. A tightly rung elliptical circle or torches cast their wavering shafts prancing morbidly over the smooth surface of a rectangular, ridged altar. Expertly chiseled forms of grotesque gargoyles graced the oblique rim, protubrating the length of the grim orifice of death, staring forever ahead. There's a lot of run-on sentences here. Staring forever ahead into nothingness in complete ignorance of the bloody rites enacted in their presence. Brown, flaking stains decorated the golden surface of the ridge surrounding the altar, which banked to a small slit at the lower right-hand corner of the altar. The slit stood above a crudely pounded pail, which had several silver-meshed chalices hanging at its sides. Dangling at the rim of golden mallet, the handle of which was engraved with images of twisted faces and groved at its far end with slots designed for a snug hand grip. The head of the mallet was slightly larger than a clenched fist and shaped into a smooth oval mass. Encircling the marble altar was a congregation of leering shaman. Eerie chants of a bygone age, originating unknown eons before the memory of man, were being uttered from the buried recesses of the acolytes' deeplings. The acolytes' deeplings? Orange paint was smeared in generous globules over the tops of the priests' wrinkled, shaven scalps, while golden rings projected from the lobes of their pink ears. Ornate robes of luscious purple satin enclosed their bulging torsos, attached around their waists with silvered silk lashes latched with ebony buckles in the shape of morose, misshaped skulls. Dangling around their necks were oval-fashioned medallions held by thin gold chains, featuring in their centers blood-red rubies which resembled crimson fetish eyeballs. Can you guys picture this scene? Because I feel like I'm there. Cushioning their bare feet were plush red felt slippers with pointed golden spikes projecting from their tips. Situated in front of the altar and directly adjacent to the copper pail was a massive jade idol, a misshaped, hideous bust of the shaman's pagan deity. The shimmering green idol was placed in a sitting posture on an ornately carved golden throne raised upon a round, ivory-plated dais, probably ivory. its bulging arms and webbed hands resting on the padded arms of the seat. Its head was entwined in golden snake-like coils hanging over its oblong ears, which tapered off to thin, hollow points. Its nose was a bulging triangular mass, sunken in at its sides with toe-gaping nostrils. Dramatic beneath the nostrils was a twisted, shaggy-lipped mouth, giving the impression of a slavering, sadistic grimace. At the foot of the heathen deity, a slender, pale-faced female, naked, she had to be, naked but for a golden, jeweled harness enshrouding her huge, outcropping breasts, supporting long silver laces which extended to her thigh, stood before the pearl-white field with noticeable shivers traveling up and down the length of her exquisitely molded body. This dude was horny as shit. This guy was so goddamn horny. It's unbelievable to me. Her delicate lips trembled beneath Her delicate lips trembled beneath soft, narrow hands as she attempted to conceal herself from the piercing stare of the ambivalent idol. Glaring directly down towards her was the stony, cycloptic face of the bloated deity. Gaping from its single oblong, socket was scintillating, many-faceted scarlet emerald, a brilliant gem seeming to possess a life all of its own. A priceless, gleaming stone capable of domineering the wealth of conquering empires. The Eye of Argon. Fuck yeah. This is the first time that we've encountered the eponymous Eye of Argon in our narrative, so I feel like you should really make note of this. This, of course, concludes chapter 3.5. Chapter 4. All knowledge of measuring time had escaped Grigner. When a person is deprived of the sun, moon, and stars, he loses all conception of time as he had previously understood it. It seemed as if years had passed if time were being measured by terms of misery and mental anguish, yet he estimated that his stay had only been a few days in length. So not all knowledge of measuring time has escaped Grigner. He's making a pretty solid estimate here. He has slept 3 times and had been fed 5 times since his awakening in the crypt. However, when the actions of the body are restricted, its needs are also affected. The need for nourishment and slumber are directly proportional to the functions the body has performed, meaning that when free and active Grigner may have become hungry every 6 hours and witnessed the desire for sleep every 15 hours, whereas in his present condition, he may encounter the need for food every 10 hours and the want for rest every 20 hours. All methods he had before depended upon were extinct in the dismal pit. Great. Hence, he may have been imprisoned for 10 minutes or 10 years, he did not know, resulting in a disheartened emotion deep within his being. Now, I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. I think 10 minutes or 10 years, it's definitely somewhere in between. The food, if you can honor the moldering lumps of fetid mush to that extent, was borne to him by 2 guards, who opened a portal at the top of his enclosure and shoved it to him in wooden bowls, retrieving the food and water bowls from his previous meal at the same time, after which they threw back the bolts on the iron latch and returned to their other duties. Since deprived of all other means of nourishment, Grigner was impelled to eat the tainted slop in order to ward off the pangs of starvation, though as he stuffed it into his mouth with his filthy fingers and struggled to force it down his throat, this is the weirdest boner I've ever had, he imagined it was that which had been spurned by the hounds stationed at various segments of the palace. There was little in the barren vault that could occupy his body or mind. He had placed out the length and width of the he had paced out the length and width of the enclosure time and time again, and tested every granite slab which consisted the walls of the prison in hopes of finding a hidden passage to freedom, all of which was to no avail other than to keep him busy and distract his mind from wandering to thoughts of what he believed was his future. He had memorized the number of strides from one end to the other of the cell, and he knew the exact number of slabs which made up the bleak dungeon. Numerous schemes were introduced and alternately discarded in turn as they succored to unravel to him no means of escape which stood the slightest chance of success. Anguish continued to mount as his means of occupation were rapidly exhausted, two separate words, suddenly with no tithe. Suddenly with no tithe, he was routed from his contemplations as he detected a faint scratching sound at the end of the crypt opposite him. The sound seemed to be caused by something trying to scrape away at the granite blocks the floor of the enclosure consisted of, the sandy scratching of something like an animal's claws. Grigner gradually groped his way to the other end of the vault, carefully feeling his way along with his hands ahead of him. When a few inches from the wall, a loud, penetrating squeal and the scampering of small padded feet reverberated from the walls of the roughly hewn chamber. Grigner threw his hands up to shield his face and flung himself backwards upon his buttocks. A fuzzy form bounded to his hairy chest, burying its talons in his flesh while gnashing towards his throat with its grinding white teeth. Its sour, fetid breath scorching the squirming barbarian's dilated nostrils. Grigner grappled with the lashing flexor muscles of the repugnant body of a gargantuan, brown-hided rat, striving to hold its razor teeth from his juicy jugular. This dude fucking loves alliteration, and seriously, I'm here for it. Reading this feels really good. There are so many sentences in this that, are obviously, dog shit. This is clearly, I would guess this person's, a teenager, the person writing this. Now, I've done no prior research. I would guess that the person writing this is a teenager, but I feel like they've managed to create some really fun sentences to read. Even though they sound terrible and everything feels extremely overwrought. Striving to hold its razor teeth from his juicy jugular. I mean, that just feels fucking awesome to read. As its beady gray organs of sight. The way this guy describes eyes, too, is fucking awesome. Ovals and orbs and organs of sight. As its beady gray organs of sight glazed into the flaring emeralds again its prey. It's awesome. He's probably just learned in an English class that it's you don't want to just say the same thing over and over again, so you don't want to say eyes over and over again. But the way that he's going about it is it's just fantastic. I got to read this again. As its beady gray organs of sight glazed into the flaring emeralds of its prey. They made eye contact. Taking hold of the rodent around its lean, growling stomach with both hands, Grigner pried it from his crimson-rent breast, removing small patches of flayed flesh from his chest. Now, here's the thing. He says chest twice here. Why didn't he say, from his rippling barrel or something? Removing small patches of flayed flesh from his chest in the motion between the squalid black claws of the starving beast. Holding the rodent at arm's length, he cupped his right hand over its frothing face, contracting his fingers into a vice-like fist over the quivering head. Retaining his grips on the rat, Grigner flexed his outstretched arms while slowly twisting his right hand clockwise and his left hand counterclockwise motion, kind of like what we used to call an Indian sunburn. I'm sure that there's probably a newer name for that, but that's what we used to call that. The rodent let out a tortured squall, drawing scarlet as it violently dug its foam-flecked fangs into the barbarian's sweating palm, causing his face to contort to an ugly grimace as he cursed beneath his breath. With a loud crack, the rodent's head parted from its squirming torso, sending out a sprinkling shower of crimson gore, and trailing a slimy string of disjointed vertebrae, snapped trachea, esophagus, and jugular, disjointed hyoid bone, morose purpled stretched hide, and blood-seared muscles. Flinging the broken body to the floor, Grigner shook his blood-streaked hands and wiped them against his thigh until dry, then wiped the blood that had showered his face and from his eyes. Again sitting himself upon the jagged floor, he prepared to once more revamp his glum meditations. He told himself that as long as he still breathed the gust of life through his lungs, hope was not lost. He told himself this, but found it hard to comprehend in his gloomy surroundings. Yet he was still alive, his bulging sinews at their peak of marvel, his struggling mind floating in a mural of impressed excellence of thought. Plot after plot sifted through his mind in energetic contemplations. Then it hit him. Minutes may have passed in silent thought or days, he could not tell, but he stumbled at last upon a plan that he considered as holding a slight margin of plausibility. He might die in the attempt, but he knew he would not submit without a final bloody struggle. It was not a foolproof plan, yet it built up a store of renewed vortexed energy in his overwrought soul. Though he might perish in the execution of the escape, he would still be escaping the life of infinite torture in store for him. Either way, he would still cheat the gloating prince of the succored revenge his sadistic mind craved so dearly. The guards would soon come to bear him off to the prince's buried mines of dread, giving him the sought-after opportunity to execute his nearly formulated plan. Groping his way along the rough floor, Grigner finally found his tool in a pool of congealed gore. The carcass of the decapitated rodent, the tool that the very filth he had been sentenced to spawned. When the time came for action, he would have to be prepared, so he set himself to rending the sticky hulk in grim silence, searching by the touch of his fingertips for the lever to freedom. Chapter 5. "Up to the altar and be done with it, wench!" ordered a fidgeting shaman as he gave the female a grim stare accompanied by the wrinkling of his lips to a mirthful grin of delight. The girl burst into a slow, steady whimper, stooping shakily to her knees and cringing woefully from the priest with both arms wound snake-like around the bulging jade shin rising before her scantily attired figure. Her face was redly inflamed from the salty flow of tears spouting from her glassy, dilated eyeballs. With short, heavy footfalls, the priest approached the female, his piercing stare never wavering from her quivering young countenance. Halting before the terrified girl, he projected his arm outward and motioned her to arise with an upward movement of his hand. The girl's whimpering increased slightly, and she sunk closer to the floor rather than arising. The flickering torches outlined her trim build with a weird ornate glow, as it cast a ghostly shadow, dancing in horrid waves of splendor over smoothly worn whiteness of the marble-hewn altar. The shaman's lips curled back farther, exposing a set of blackened, decaying molars, which transformed his slovenly grin into a wide, greasy arc of sadistic mirth, and alternately interposed into the female a strong sensation of stomach-curdling nausea. "Have it as you will, female," gloated the enhanced priest as he bent over at the waist, projecting his ape-like arms forward, and clasped the female's slender arms with his hairy round fists. With an inward surge of his biceps, he harshly jerked the trembling girl to her feet, and smothered her salty wet cheeks with the moldy touch of his decrepit, dull red lips. Alright, I guess this is going to be the sexual assault content warning. Frankly, if you've made it this far into the book, this book is full of hideous violence and sexual depravity, and I don't really know what to tell you. It's gross. It's just a gross, nasty, fucking puberty-fueled fantasy of some weirdo, and there's really no redeeming quality to the narrative here. So anyway, we're going to press onward. The vile stench of the shaman's hot, fetid breath overcame the nauseated female with a deep, soul-searing sickness, causing her to wrench her head backwards and regurgitate a slimy, orange-white stream of swelling gore over the richly woven purple robe of the enthused acolyte. The priest's lips trembled with a malicious rage as he removed his callous paws from the girl's arms and replaced them with tightly around her undulating neck, shaking her violently to and fro. The girl gasped a tortured groan from her clamped lungs, her sea-blue eyes bulging forth from damp sockets. Cocking her right foot backwards, she leashed it desperately outwards with the strength of a demon-possessed, lodging her sandaled foot squarely between the shaman's testicles. Good for her. I think in this situation, that's the first thing you should do. You should go straight for the nuts. The startled priest released his crushing grip, crimping his body over at the waist, overlooking his recessed belly. Wide open in a deep chasm. Okay? His face flushed to a rose-red shade of crimson, eyelids fluttering wide with eyeballs protruding blindly outwards from their sockets to their outmost perimeters, while his lips quivered wildly about, allowing an agonized wallow to gust forth from his breath billowed from burning lungs. His hands reached out, clutching his urinary gland. As his knees wobbled rapidly about for a few seconds, then buckled, causing the ruptured shaman to collapse in an egg-huddled mass to the granite pavement, rolling helplessly about in his agony. Now, honestly, dude, I hope you're not expecting any sympathy from the reader here. It sounds like you deserved it, maybe more. The pathetic screeches of the shaman groveling in dejected misery upon the hand-hewn granite-laid pavement, worn smooth by countless hours of arduous sweat and toil, a welter of ichor oozing through his clenched hands, attracted the perturbed attention of his comrades from their fetid ululations. The actions of this rebellious wench bespoke the credence of an unheard-of sacrilege. Never before in a lost maze of untold eons had a chosen one dared to demonstrate such blasphemy in the face of the cult's idolic deity. The girl cowered in unreasoning terror, helpless in the face of the emblazoned acolyte's rage. Her orchid-tussled face smothered betwixt her bulging bosom as she shut her curled lashed tightly, hoping to open them and find herself awakening from a morbid nightmare. Yet the hand of destiny decreed her no such mercy. The antagonized pack of leering shaman, converging intensely upon her prostrate form, were entangled all too lividly in the grim web of reality. Shuddering from the clammy touch of the shaman as they grasped with her supple form, hands wrenching at her slender arms and legs in all directions, her bare body being molested in the midst of a labyrinth of orange smudges, purpled satin, and mangled skulls, shadowed in an eerie crimson glow. Her confused head reeled, then clouded in a mist of enshrouding ebony as she lapsed beneath the protective sheet of unconsciousness to a land peach and resign. Chapter 6. "Take hold of this rope," said the first soldier, "and climb out from your pit, slut. Your presence is requested in another far deeper hellhole." Grigner slipped his right hand to his thigh, concealing a small opaque object beneath the folds of the G-string wrapped around his waist. Brine wells swelled in Grigner's cold, jade-squinting eyes, which, grown accustomed to the gloom of the Stygian pools of ebony engulfing him, were bedazzled and blinded by flickering radiance cast forth by the second soldier's resin torch. Tightly gripped in the second soldier's right hand, opposite the intermittent torch was a large double-edged axe, a long leather-wound oaken-handled transfixing the center of the weapon's iron head. Adorning the torsos of both of the sentries were thin yet sturdy hauberks, the breastplates of which were woven of tightly hemmed twines of reinforced silver braiding. Cupping the soldiers' feet were thick leather sandals, wound about their shins to 2 inches below their knees. Wrapped about their waists were wide satin girdles, with slender bladed poniards dangling loosely from them, the hilts of which featured scarlet-encrusted gems. Resting upon the manes of their heads and reaching midway to their brows were smooth copper morions. Spiraling the lower portion of the helmet were short, up-curved silver spikes, while a golden hump spired from the top of each bassinet. Beneath their chins, wound around their necks and draping their clad shoulders, dangled regal purple satin cloaks, which flowed midway to the soldiers' feet. Now, this guy's clearly got an eye or a mind for outfit design in the fantasy realm. I wonder if he was not the DM for many a D&D campaign. That's just what this feels like. Somebody who, like, you know, his friends loved, like, his fucking insane D&D campaigns so much that they were like, "You should write a book," and he was like, "Yeah, definitely." And, like, that's the Eye of Argon. So yeah, this is insane. Hand over hand, feet braced against the dank walls of the enclosure, huge Grigner ascended from the smoldering depths of the forlorn abyss. His swelled limbs, stiff due to the boredom of a timeless inactivity, compounded by the musty atmosphere and jagged granite protuberance against his body, craved for action. The opportunity now presenting itself served the purpose of oiling his rusty joints and honing his dulled senses. He braced himself, facing the second soldier. The sentry's stature was of wildly exaggerated in the glare of the flickering crescent cuppix in his right fist. Cupped, probably. His eyes were wide open in a slightly slanted owlish gaze, enhanced in their sinister intensity by the hawkbill curve of his nose and pale yellow peak of his cheeks. "Place your hands behind your back," said the second soldier as he raised his axe over his right shoulder blade and cast it a wavering glance. "We must bind your wrists to parry any attempts at escape. Be sure to make the knot a stout one, Broig. We wouldn't want our guests to take leave of our guidance." Broig grasped Grigner's left wrist and reached for the barbarian's right wrist. Grigner wrenched his right arm free and swiveled to face Broig, reach beneath his loincloth with his right hand. The sentry grappled at his girdle for the sheathed dagger, but recoiled short of his intentions as Grigner right arm swept to his gorge. The soldier went limp, his bobbing eyes rolling beneath fluttering eyelids, a deep welt across his spouting gullet. Without lingering to observe the result of his efforts, Grigner dropped to his knees. The second soldier's axe cleft over Grigner's head in a blaze of silvered ferocity, severing several scarlet locks from his scalp. Coming to rest in his fellow's stomach, the iron head crashed through mail and flesh with splintering force, spilling a pool of crimsoned entrails over the granite paving. Before the sentry could wrench his axe free from his comrade's carcass, he found Grigner's massive hands clasped about his throat, choking the life from his clamped lungs. With a zealous grunt, the accordion flexed his tightly corded biceps, forcing the grim-faced soldier to one knee. The sentry plunged his right fist into Grigner's face, digging his grimy nails into the barbarian flesh. Ejaculating a curse through rasping teeth, Grigner surged the bulk of his weight forward, bowling the besieged soldier over upon his back. The sentry's arms collapsed to his thigh, shuddering convulsively, his bulging eyes staring blindly from a bloated, cherry-red face. Rising to his feet, Grigner shook the blood from his eyes, ruffling his surly red mane as a brush fire swaying to the nighttime breeze. Stooping over the sprawled corpse of the first soldier, Grigner retrieved a small white object from a pool of congealing gore. Snorting a gusty billow of mirth, he once more concealed the tiny object beneath his loincloth, the tediously honed pelvis bone of the broken rodent. Returning his attention toward the second soldier, Grigner turned to the task of attiring his limbs. To move about freely through the dim recesses of the castle would require the grotesque garb of its soldiery. Utilizing the silence and stealth acquired in the untamed climes of his childhood, Grigner slink through twisting corridors and winding stairways, lighting his way with the confiscated torch of his dispatched guardian. Knowing where his steps were leading to, Grigner meandered aimlessly in search of an exit from the chateau's dim confines. The wild blood coursing through his veins yearned for the undefiled freedom of the livid wilderness lands. Coming upon a fork in the passage, he shrieked. Voices accompanied by clinking footfalls discerned to his sensitive ears from the left corridor. Wishing to avoid contact, Grigner veered to the right passageway. If quested as to the purpose of his presence, his barbarous accent would reveal his identity, being that his attire was not that of the castle's mercenary troops. Now, I thought it was. I thought he just put on their clothes. Oh well, I guess not. I don't know. In grim silence, Grigner treaded down the dingily lit corridor, a stalking panther creeping warily along on padded feet. After an interminable period of wandering through the dull corridors, no gaps to break the monotony of the cold gray walls, Grigner espied a small winding stairway. Descending the flight of arced granite slabs to their posterior, Grigner was confronted by a short hallway leading to a tall arched wooden doorway. Halting before the teeming portal, Grigner rests his shaggy head sideways against the barrier. Detecting no sounds from within, he grasped the looped metal handle of the door, his arms surging with a tremendous effort of bulging muscles, yet the door would not budge. Retrieving his axe from where he had sheathed it beneath his girdle, he hefted it in his mighty hands with an appeased grunt, and wedging one of its blackened edges into the crack between the portal and its iron-rimed sill. Bracing his sandaled right foot against the rudgely hewn wall, teeth tightly clenched, Grigner apple-levered the oaken haft, employing it as a lever whereby to pry open the barrier. The leather-wound hilt bending to its utmost limits of endurance, the massive portal swung open with a grating of snapped latch and rusty iron hinges. Glancing about the dust-swirled room in the gloomily danced glare of his flickering cresset, Grigner eyed evidences of the enclosure being nothing more than a forgotten storeroom. Miscellaneous articles required for the maintenance of a castle were piled in disorganized heaps at infrequent intervals toward the wall opposite the barbarian's piercing stare. Utilizing long, bounding strides, Grigner paced his way over to the mounds of supplies to discover if any articles of value were contained within their midst. Detecting a faint clinking sound, Grigner sprawled to his left side with the speed of a striking cobra, landing harshly upon his back. Torch and axe loudly clattering to the floor in a morass of sparks and flame. An elm-woven board leaped from collapsed flooring, clashing against the jagged flooring and spewing a shower of orange and yellow sparks over Grigner's startled face. Rising uneasily to his feet, the half-stunned Accordion glared down at the gruesome arm of death he had unwittingly sprung. Mrifk! That's just what he says. I think that's his god. Mrifk! If not for his keen auditory organs and lighting-steeled reflexes, Grigner would have been groping through the shadowed hell pits of the Grim Reaper. He had unknowingly stumbled upon an ancient, long-forgotten booby trap, a mistake which would have stunted the perusal of longevity of one less agile. A mechanism, similar in type to that of a miniature catapult, was concealed beneath two collapsible sections of granite flooring. The arm of the device was 4 feet long, boasting razor-like cleats at regular intervals along its face, with which it was to skewer the luckless body of its would-be victim. Grigner had stepped upon a concealed catch which relaced a small metal latch beneath the 2 granite sections, causing them to fall inward, and thereby loose the spiked arm of death they precariously held in. Partially out of curiosity, and partially out of an inordinate fear of becoming a pincushion for a possible second trap, Grigner plunged his torch into the exposed gap in the floor. The floor of a second chamber stood out 7 feet below the glare. Tossing his torch through the aperture, Grigner grasped the side of an adjoining tile, dropping down. So he's trying to escape. He knows he's in the dungeon. Why is he going down? I don't know. I guess it's good because he's probably going to save this chick from the evil rapey priests down in the Argon chamber. So, hopefully he gets there. That being said, he's also almost definitely going to take advantage of her immediately after saving her. But I guess in this world, she's probably going to be into it. So, who knows, man? I don't know what the morality of any of the characters involved in this is. Glancing about the room, Grigner discovered that he had descended into the palace's mausoleum. Rectangular stone crypts cluttered the floor at evenly placed intervals. The tops of the enclosures were plated with thick layers of virgin gold, while the sides were plated with white ivory. At one time sparkling, but now grown dingy through the passage of the rays of all-encompassing Mother Time. Featured at the head of each sarcophagus in tarnished silver was an expugnatively carved likeness of its rotting inhabitant. I gotta know if that's a real word. Nah, man, I think he's just trying to say expensively. Expugnatively. Fuck, there are so many great made-up words in this. A dingy atmosphere pervaded the air of the chamber, which sealed in the enclosure for an unknown period had grown thick and stale. Intermingling with the curdled currents was the repugnant stench of slowly moldering flesh, creeping ever slowly but surely through minute cracks in the numerous vaults. Due to the embalming of the bodies, their flesh decayed at a much slower rate than normal, yet the nauseous odor was none the less repellent. Towering over Grigner's head was the trap he released. The mechanism of the miniaturized catapult was cluttered with mildew and cobwebs. Notwithstanding these relics of antiquity, its efficiency remained unimpinged. To the right of the trap wound a short stairway through a recession in the ceiling, a concealed entrance leading to the mausoleum for which the catapult had obviously been erected as a silent, relentless guardian. Climbing up the side of the device, Grigner set to the task of resetting its mechanism. In the event that a search was organized, it would prove well to leave no evidence of his presence open to wandering eyes. Besides, it might even serve to dwindle the size of an opposing force. Descending from his perch, Grigner was startled by a faintly muffled scream of horrified desperation. His hair prickled yawkishly in disorganized clumps along his scalp, as a cold danced along the length of his spinal cord. No moral/mortal barrier, human or otherwise, was capable of arousing the numbing sensation of fear inside of Grigner's smoldering soul. However, he was overwrought by the forces of the barbarian's instinctive fear of the supernatural. His mighty thews had always served to adequately conquer any tangible foe. What are thews? This is the second time he said it. Thew, muscular strength. It's an old poetic term. Muscles and tendons, perceived as generating such strength. Huh. Okay, so that's a real word. His mighty thews had always served to adequately conquer any tangible foe, but the intangible was something distant and terrible. Dim, horrifying tales passed by word of mouth over glimmering campfires and skins of wine had more than once served the purpose of chilling the marrowed core of his sturdy-limbed bones. Yet, the scream contained a strangely human quality, unlike that which Grigner imagined would come from the lungs of a demon or spirit, making Grigner take short, nervous strides, advancing to the sarcophagus from which the sound was issuing. Clenching his teeth in an attempt to steel his jangled nerves, Grigner slid the engraved slab from the vault with a sharp rasp of grinding stone. Another long-drawn cry of terror, infested anguish met the barbarian, scoring like the shrill piping of a demented banshee, piercing his inner fibers of his superstitious brain with primitive dread, and awe. Some of these have to be typos. I mean, I don't know. It's a lot of repetition of words here. Stooping over to espy the tomb's contents, the glittering accordion's nostrils were singed by the scorching aroma of a moldering corpse, long shut up and fermenting. The same putrid scent which permeated the entire chamber, though multiplied to a much more concentrated dosage. The shriveled, leathery packet of crumbling bones and dried, flacking flesh offered no resistance, but remained in a fixed position of perpetual vigilance, watching over its dim abode from hollowed, gaping sockets. The tortured cries were not coming from the tomb, but from some hidden depth below. Pulling the reeking corpse from its resting place, Grigner tossed it to the floor in a broken, mangled heap. Upon one side of the crypt's bottom was attached a series of tiny hinges, while running parallel along the opposite side of a convex railing-like protuberance, laid so as to appear as a part of the interior surface of the sarcophagus. Raising the slab upon its bronze hinges, long removed from the gaze of human eyes, Grigner perceived a scene which caused his blood to smolder, not unlike bubbling, molten lava. Directly below him, a whimpering female lay stretched upon a smooth-surfaced marble altar. A pack of gracie-faced shaman clustered around her in a tight, circular formation. Crouched over the girl was a tall, pot-bellied priest, his mouth dominated by a disgusting, open-mouthed grimace of sadistic glee. Suspended from the acolyte's clenched right hand was a carven, oval-faced mallet, which he waved menacingly over the girl's shadowed face. Never dangle your mallet over a lady's face without her consent, okay? I think we all know that better than that. It's 2023. An incoherent gibberish flowing from his grinning, thick-lipped mouth. In the face of the amorphous, broad-breasted female, probably breasted, stretching out alluringly before his gasping eyes, the universal whim of nature filling a plea of despair inside of his white-hot soul, Grigner acted in the only manner he could perceive. Giving vent to a hoarse, throat-rending battle cry, Grigner plunged into the midst of the startled shaman, torch simmering in his left hand and axe twirling in his right hand. A gaunt, skull-faced priest, standing at the far side of the altar, clutched desperately at his throat, coughing furiously in an attempt to catch his breath. Lurching helplessly to and fro, the acolyte pitched headlong against the gleaming base of a massive jade idol. Now, I think we've seen this idol before, but, Grigner has not. Writhing agonizedly against the hideous image, foam flecking his chalk-white lips, the priest struggled helplessly, the victim of an epileptic seizure. Startled by the barbarian's stunning appearance, the chronic fit of their fellow, and the fear that Grigner might be the avant-garde? Advanced guard, I think what they're saying. The avant-garde of a conquering force dedicated to or vanguard, maybe he meant. Well, he wrote avant-garde. The avant-garde of a conquering force dedicated to the cause of destroying their degenerated cult. The Saman momentarily lost their composure. Giving vent to heedless pandemonium, the priests fell easy prey to Grigner's sweeping arc of crimsoned death and maiming destruction. The acolyte performing the sacrifice took a vicious blow to the stomach, hands clutching vitals and severed spinal cord as he sprawled over the altar. The disorganized priests lurched and staggered with split skulls, dismembered limbs, and spewing entrails before the enraged Echordion's relentless onslaught. The howls of the maimed and dying reverberated against the walls of the tiny chamber, the chorus of hell fraught despair, as the granite floor ran red with blood. The entire chamber was encompassed in the heat of raw, savage butchery, as Grigner luxuriated in the grips of a primitive, beastly bloodlust. Presently, all went silent save for the ebbing groans of the sinking shaman and Grigner's heavy, heaving breath accompanied by several gusty curses. The well had run dry. No more lambs remained for the slaughter. The rampaging stead of death, having taken of Grigner for the moment, left the barbarian free to the exploitation of his other Perusials. Towering over his head was the misshaped image of the cult's hideous deity, Argon. I feel like there are going to be no more chapters. I feel like this last one has been incredibly long. Let's see. Oh no, there are more. This one's just very long. Okay. Well, we'll finish this one out here. The fantastic size of the idol in consideration of its being of pure jade was enough to cause the senses of any man to stagger and reel, yet thus was not the case for the behemoth. He had paid only casual notice to this an incredible fact, while riveting the whole of his attention upon the jewel protruding from the idol's sole socket, its masterfully cut faucets emitting blinding rays of hypnotizing beauty. After all, a man cannot slink from a heavily guarded palace while burdened down by the intensive bulk of a squatting statue, providing, of course, that the idol can even be hefted, which in fact was beyond the reaches of Grigner's coursing stamina. On the other hand, the jewel, gigantic as it was, would not present a hindrance of any mean concern. "Help me, please. I can make it well worth your while," pleaded a soft, anguish-strewn voice wafting over Grigner's shoulders as he plucked the dull red emerald from its roots. Turning, Grigner faced the female that had lured him into this bloodbath, but whom had become all but forgotten in the heat of the battle. "You!" ejaculated the Echordion in a pleased tone. "I thought that I had seen the last of you at the tavern, but verily I was mistaken." Grigner advanced into the grips of the female's entrancing stare, severing the golden chains that held her captive upon the altar's highly polished face of ornamental limestone. So apparently this is the same girl that was like hammered in the tavern and I guess got him into this situation in the first place. I don't know. As Grigner lifted the girl from the altar, her arms wound dexterously about his neck, soft and smooth against his harsh exterior. Art thou pleased that we have chanced to meet once again?" Grigner merely voiced an sighed grunt, returning the damsel's embrace while he smothered her trim, delicate lips between the coursing protrusions of his reeking maw. Oh my god. "Let us take leave of this wretched chamber," stated Grigner as he placed the female upon her feet. She swooned a moment, causing Grigner to give her support, then regained her stance. "Art thou able to find your way through the accursed passages of this castle? Mrifk! Every one of the corridors of this damned place are identical." "Aye, I was at one time a slave of Prince Agaphim. His clammy touch sent a sour swill through my belly, but my efforts reaped a harvest. I gained the pig's liking, whereby he allowed me the freedom of the palace. It was through this means that I eventually managed escape of the palace. It was a simple matter to seduce the sentry at the western gate. His trust found him with a dagger thrust in his ribs," the wench stated, Whimsicorically? Again, is this a real word? Whimsicorically. Nope. Whimsicorically. All right. What were you doing at the tavern whence I discovered you? Asked Grigner as he lifted the female through the opening into the mausoleum. I had sought to lay low from the palace's guards as they conducted their search for me. The tavern was seldom frequented by the palace guards, and my identity was unknown to the common soldiers. It was through the disturbance that you caused that the palace guards were attracted to the tavern. I was dragged away shortly after you were escorted to the palace. What are you called by, female? Carthena, daughter of Mincardos, Duke of Barwigo, whose lands border along the northwestern fringes of Gorzam. I was paid as homage to Agaphim upon his 38th year, husked the femme. And I am called a barbarian, grunted Grigner in a disgusted tone. Oh, it's more like, and I am called a barbarian, grunted Grigner in a disgusted tone. I guess he's, like, really bothered by the idea that she would, like, be given as tribute. I don't know. He didn't seem very progressive until now, but apparently that's not something barbarians do. Aye, the ways of our civilization are in many ways warped and distorted. But what is your calling? She queried bustily. Grigner of Ecordia. Ah, I have heard vaguely of Ecordia. It is the hill country to the far east of the Noragolian Empire. I have also heard Agaphim curse your land more than once when his troops were routed in the unaccustomed mountains and gorges, saith she. Aye, my people are not tarnished by petty luxuries and baubles. I mean, the dude is stealing a big jewel, but whatever. They remain fierce and unconquerable in their native claims. After reaching the hidden panel at the head of the stairway, Grigner was at a loss in regard to its operation. His fiercest heaves were as pebbles against burnished armor. Carthena depressed a small symbol included within the elaborate design upon the panel where open, it slowly slid into a cleft in the wall. How did you come to be the victim of those crazed shaman? Quested Grigner as he escorted Carthena through the piles of rummage on the left side of the trap. By Aphim's orders, I think Agaphim. By Aphim's orders, I was thrust into a secluded cell to await his passing of sentence. By some means, the priests of Argon acquired a set of keys to the cell. They slew the guard placed over me and abducted me to the chamber in which you chanced to come upon the Skostik sacrifice? What the fuck does Skostik mean? Nothing. I've never seen any of these words. He's just making shit up. This is wild. Their hell-spawned cult demands a sacrifice once every 3 moons upon its full journey through the heavens. They were startled by your unannounced appearance through the fear that you had been sent by Agaphim. The prince would surely have submitted to them the most ghastly of tortures if he had ever discovered their unfaithfulness to Sargon, his bastard deity. Okay, so they're the priests of Argon. Agaphim worships Sargon. Okay. Many of the partakers of the ritual were high nobles and high trustees of the inner palace. Agaphim's pitiless wrath would have been unparalleled. They have no more to fear of Agaphim now, bellowed Grigner in a deep, mirthful tone, a gleeful smirk upon his face. I have seen that they were delivered from his vengeance. Engrossed by Carthena's graceful stride and conversation, Grigner failed to take note of the footfalls rapidly approaching behind him. As he swung aside the arched portal linking the chamber with the corridors beyond, a maddened, blood-lusting screech reverberates from his eardrums. Seemingly utilizing the speed of thought, Grigner swiveled to face his unknown foe. With gaping eyes and widened jaws, Grigner raised his axe above his surly mane. But he was too late. 7. With wobbling knees and swimming head, the priest that had lapsed into an epileptic seizure rose unsteadily to his feet. While enacting his choking fit in writhing agony, the shaman was overlooked by Griegner. The barbarian had mistaken the seizure for the death throes of the acolyte, allowing the priest to avoid his stinging blade. The sight that met the priest's inflamed eyes nearly served to sprawl him upon the floor once more. The sacrificial sat it grim, blood-spattered silence all around him, broken only by the occasional yelps and howls of his maimed and butchered fellows. Above his head rose the hideous idol, its empty socket holding the shaman's furbished, infuriated gaze. His eyes turned to a stony glaze with the realization of the pillage and blasphemy. Due to his high susceptibility following the seizure, the priest was transformed into a raving maniac, bent solely upon wreaking vengeance. With lips curled and quivering, a crust of foam dripping from them, the acolyte drew a long, wicked-looking, jewel-hilted scimitar from his silver girdle, and fled through the aperture in the ceiling, uttering a faintly perceptible, ceremonial gibberish. Dude, I forgot how fucking great this book was. Okay, here we go. 7.5. A sweeping scimitar swung towards Griegner's head in a shadowed blur of motion. With axe raised over his head, Griegner prepared to parry the blow while gaping wide-eyed in open-mouthed perplexity. Suddenly, a sharp snap resounded behind the frothing shaman. The scimitar, halfway through its fatal sweep, dropped from a quivering, nerveless hand, clattering harmlessly to the stonage. Cutting his screech short with a babbling, red-mouthed gurgle, the lacerated acolyte staggered under the pressure of the released springboard. After a moment of hopeless struggling, the shaman buckled, sprawling face down in a widening pool of blood and entrails. His regal purple robe blending enhancingly with the swirling streams of crimson. Now remember, I'm reading this book as it's written, so because I want to convey to you how many fucking weird typos and shit there are in the Eye of Argon. Rifk, I thought I had killed the last of those dogs, muttered Griegner in a half-apathetic state. Nay, Griegner, you doubtless grew careless while giving vent to your lusts, but let us not tarry any long, lest we overtax the fates. The paths leading to freedom will soon be barred. The wretch's cries must certainly have attracted unwanted attention, the wench mused. By what direction shall we pursue our flight? Up that stair and down the corridor a short distance is the concealed entrance to a tunnel seldom used by others than the prince, and known to few others save the palace's royalty. It is used mainly by the prince when he wishes to take leave of the palace in secret. It is not always in the prince's best interests to leave his chateau in public view. Even while under heavy guard, he is often assaulted by hurtling stones and rotting fruits. The commoners have little love for him, lectured the near lady. What the fuck is a near lady? It is amazing that they would have ever have left a pig like him become their ruler. Huh. I should imagine that his people would raise up and crucify him like the dog he is. Alas, Griegner, it is not as simple as all that. His soldiers are well paid by him. So long as he keeps their wages up, they will carry out his damned wishes. The crude implements of the common folk would never stand up under an onslaught of forged blades and protective armor. They would be going to their own slaughter, stated Carthena to a confused but angered Griegner as they topped the stairway. Yet how can they bear to live under such oppression? I would sooner die beneath the sword than live under such a dog's command, added Griegner as the pair stalked down the hall in the direction opposite that in which Griegner had come. But all men are not of the same mold that you are born of. They choose to live as they are, so as to save their filthy necks from the chopping block, returned Carthena in a disgusted tone as she cast an appeased glance towards the stalwart figure at her side, whose left arm wound dexterously about her slim waist, his slowly waning torch casting their images in intermingling wisps as it dangled from his left hand. Presently, Carthena came upon the panel, concealed amongst the other granite slabs, and discernible only by the burned-out cresset above it. As I pushed the cresset aside, pushed the panel inwards. Katerina motioned. This is so hard to read. I just want you guys to understand, like, I'm doing my best here. Okay, this is legitimately hard to read. Katerina motioned to the panel as she was referring to and twisted the cresset in a counterclockwise motion. Grigner braced his right shoulder against the walling, concentrating the force of his bulk against it. The slab gradually swung inward with a slight grating sound. Carthena stooped beneath Grigner's corded arms and crawled upon all fours, nice, into the passage beyond. Grigner followed after easing the slab back into place. Winding before the pair was a dark, musty tunnel, exhibiting tangled spider webs from its ceiling to wall, and an oozing, sickly slime running lazily upon its floor. Hanging from the chipped wall upon Grigner's right side was a half-moldered corpse, its gray flacking arms held in place by rusted iron manacles. Carthena flinched back into Grigner's arms at sight of the leering set in an ugly, distorted grimace, staring horribly at her from hollow, gaping sockets. This alcove must also be used by Agathime as a torture chamber. I wonder how many of his enemies have disappeared into these haunts, never to be heard from again, pondered the hulking brute. Let us flee before we are also caught within Agathime's ghastly clutches. The exit from this tunnel cannot be very far from here, said Carthena, with a slight sob to her voice. Sorry, you know what? I didn't do the sob. As she sagged in Grigner's encompassing embrace. Aye, it will be best to be finished with this corridor as soon as it is possible. Why do you flinch from the sight of death so? Mrift, you have seen much death this day without exhibiting such emotions, exclaimed Grigner as he led her trembling form along the dingy confines. The man hanging from the wall was Doyanta. He had committed the folly of showing affections for me in front of Agathime. He never meant any harm by his actions. At this, Carthena broke into a slow, steady whimpering, chalking her voice with gasping sobs. There was never anything between us, yet Agathime did this to him. The beast! May the demons of hell's deepest haunts claw away at his wretched flesh for this merciless act, she prayed. I detect that you felt more for this fellow than you wish to let on. But enough of this. We can talk of such matters after we are once more free to do so. With this, Grigner lifted the grieved female to her feet and strode onward down the corridor, supporting the bulk of her weight with his surging left arm. Presently, a dim light was perceptibly filtering into the tunnel, casting a dim reddish hue upon the moldy wall of the passage's grim confines. Carthena had ceased her whimpering and partially regained her composure. The tunnel's end must be nearing. Rays of sunlight are beginning to seep into... Grigner clammied his right hand over Carthena's mouth, and with a... Clammied? What is this even supposed to say? Oh, clamped, probably. Well, it says clammied. Grigner clammied his right hand over Carthena's mouth, and with a slight struggle pulled her over to the shadows at the right-hand wall of the path, while at the same time thrusting his torch beneath an overhanging stone to smother its flickering rays. Be silent. I can hear footfalls approaching through the tunnel, growled Grigner in a hushed tone. All that you hear are the horses corralled at the far end of the tunnel. That is a further sign that we are nearing our goal, she stated. All that you hear is less than I hear. I heard footsteps coming towards us. Silence yourself that we may find out whom we are being brought into contact with. I doubt that any would have thought as yet of searching this passage for us. The advantage of surprise will be on our side, Grigner warned. Arthena cast her eyes downward and ceased any further pursuit towards conversation, an irritating habit in which she had gained an amazing proficiency. Proficiency again. Two figures came into the pair's view, from around a turn in the tunnel. They were clothed in rich, luxuriant silks and rambling on in their conversation, while ignoring of their crouching foes, waiting in an ambush ahead. That barbarian dog is cringing beneath the weight of the lash at this very moment, sire, He shall cause no more disturbance. Aye, and so it is with any who dare to cross the path of Sargon's chosen one, said the second man. But the peasants are showing signs of growing unrest. They complain that they cannot feed their they cannot feed their families while burdened with your taxes. I shall teach those sluts the meaning of humility. Order an immediate increase upon their taxes. They dare to question my sovereign authority. Ha ha! They shall soon learn what true oppression can be. I will... A shadowed bulk leapt from behind a jutting promontory as it brought down a double-edged axe with the sped of a striking thought. One of the nobles sagged lifeless to the ground, skull split to the teeth. Grigner gasped as he observed the bisected face set in its leering death agonies. It was Agafund. The dead man's comrade, having recovered from his shock, drew a jewel-encrusted dagger from beneath the folds of his robe and lunged toward the barbarian's back. Grigner spun at the sound from behind and smashed down his crimsoned axe. God, some of these sentences are hard. Smashed down his crimsoned axe once more. His agonist lunged howling to a stream of stagnant green water, grasping a sprouting stump that had once been a wrist. Grigner raised his axe over his head and prepared to finish the incomplete job, but was deterred halfway through his lunge by a frenzied screech from behind. Carthena leapt to the head of the writhing figure, plunging a smoldering torch into the agonized face. The howls increased in their horrid intensity, stifled by a sizzling of roasted flesh, then died down until the man was reduced to a blubbering mass of squirming, insensate flesh. Grigner advanced to Carthena's side, wincing slightly from the putrid aroma of charred flesh that rose in a puff of thick white smog throughout the chamber. Carthena reeled slightly, staring dazedly downward at her gruesome handiwork. "I had to do it. It was Agaphim. I had to," she exclaimed. "Sargon should be more careful of his right-hand men," added Grigner, a smug grin upon his lips. "But to hell with Sargon for now. The stench is becoming bothersome to me." I love trying to do Grigner. I feel like I just think of him as, like, the dumbest guy. With that, Grigner grasped Carthena around the waist, leading her around the bend in the cave and into the open. A ball of feral red was rising through the mists of the eastern horizon, dissipating the slinking shadows of the night. A corral stood before the pair, enclosing two grazing... a corral. Stood before the two, enclosing two grazing mares. Grigner reached into a weighted-down leather pouch dangling at his side, and drew forth the scintillant red emerald he had obtained from the bloated idol. Raising it towards the sun, he said, "We shall do well with bauble, eh?" Fuck me, man. Carthena gaped at the gem, gasping in a terrified manner. "The Eye of Argon! Oh! Kala!" At this, the gem gave off a blinding glow, then dribbled through Grigner's fingers in a slimy red ooze. Grigner stepped back, pushing Carthena behind him. The droplets of slime slowly converged into a pulsating, jelly-like mass. A single opening transfixed the blob, forming into a leech-like maw. Then the hideous transgressor of nature flowed towards Grigner, a trail of greenish slime lingering behind it. The single gap puckered repeatedly, emitting a ghastly sucking sound. Sounds like my ex-wife. Grigner spread his legs into a battle stance. Sounds like my ex-wife. Steeling his quivering thews for a battle royale with a thing he knew not how to fight. Carthena wound her arms about her protector's neck, mumbling, "Kill it! Kill!" while her entire body trembled. Sounds like my ex-wife. The thing was almost upon Grigner when he buried his axe into the gristly maw. It passed through the blob and clanged upon the ground. Grigner drew his axe back with a flim of yellow-green slime film clinging to the blade. The thing was seemingly unaffected. Then it started to sluice up his leg. The hairs upon his nape stood on end from the slimy feel of the thing's bewly bulk. The nauseous sucking sound became louder, and Grigner felt the blood being drawn from his body. With each hiss of hideous pucker, the thing increased in size. Man, this was written by the horniest boy. Grigner shook his foot about madly in an attempt to dislodge the blob, but it clung like a leech, still feeding upon his rapidly draining life fluid. He grasped with his hands, trying to rip it off, but only found his hands entangled in a sticky glue-like substance. The slimy thing continued its puckering, now having grown the size of Grigner's leg from its vampiric feast. Grigner began to reel and stagger under the blob. The blob? The blob. His chalk-white face and faltering muscles attesting to the gigantic loss of blood. Carthena slipped from Grigner in a death-like faint, a marrow-chilling scream upon her red, rubish lips. In final desperation, Grigner grasped the smoldering torch upon the ground and plunged it into the reeking maw of the traverse tree. A shudder passed through the thing. Grigner felt the blackness closing upon his eyes, but held on with the last ebb of his rapidly waning vitality. He could feel its grip lessening as a hideous, gurgling sound erupted from the writhing maw. The jelly-like mass began to bubble like a vat of boiling tar as quavers passed up and down its entire form. With a sloshing plop, the thing fell to the ground, evaporating in a thick scarlet cloud until it reattained its original size. It remained thus for a moment as the puckering maw took the shape of a protruding red eyeball, the pupil of which seemed to unravel before it, the tail of creation. How a shapeless mass slithered from the quagmires of the stigmatic pools of time, only to generate into a leprosy of avaricious lust. What a fucking sentence. In that fleeting moment, the grim mystery of life was revealed before Grigner's ensnared gaze. The eyeball's glare turned to a sudden plea of mercy, a plea for the whole of humanity. Then the blob began to quiver with violent convulsions. The eyeball shattered into 1,000 tiny fragments and evaporated into a curling wisp of scarlet mist. The very ground below the thing began to vibrate and swallow it with a belch. The thing was gone forever. All that remained was a dark red blotch upon the face of the earth, blotching things up. Oh, that is good. That is really good. Shaking his head, his shaggy mane to clear the jumbled fragments of his mind, Grigner tossed the limp female over his shoulder. Mounting one of the disgruntled mares and leading the other, the weary, scarred barbarian trooted slowly off into the horizon to become a tiny pinpoint in a filtered field of swirling blue mists, leaving the nobles, soldiers, and peasants to replace the missing monarch. Long live the king! By Jim Theus. God damn, that's the end. Well, that wasn't nearly as long as I thought it was going to be. All right, so a lot of thoughts here. That was very abrupt. I feel like I felt like there was some sort of like climactic final confrontation coming. And nope, it turns out there was not. There's so much to unpack. So he wanders in, he finds this temple, rescues the girl. I think they fuck. I think they fucked in the caverns. The priest isn't really dead, but then they kill him immediately after that. So okay, that twist is out of the way. And then as they're escaping the dungeons, Agafin or whatever, the fucking nobleman, who's the main antagonist behind all this, just happens to be wandering down and they just pass him and they kill him. So there's no like final showdown. They just kill him right there in the hallway. And then the prize that they took turns into a monster, sucks like all his blood out. She faints. Because, women, right? And then... So then he sees all the mysteries of man, which is actually, I'll be honest, is kind of cool. Like the jewel turning into like some sort of blood sucker and then just evaporating and disappearing, so he leaves with nothing. But I guess maybe the real prize is the buxom wench that he met along the way. You know, sort of a journey, not the destination kind of deal. I don't know, man. This was a trip. The Eye of Argon, for sure. You know what? I think it's funny. I don't know that I would have initially done this as like a planned 2-part project if I'd realized how sudden the ending was going to be. But I guess all the more reason to kind of remaster it and re-release it now in its complete form. So I hope you guys enjoy this. So it will obviously be coming off the feed where it was previously, and will now just be the latest numbered entry in the show. And yeah, this was a fun one. I think this would be really great to listen to. I'm going to go back and re-listen to. I mean, I listened to it before I finished recording it, but I feel like I'm going to listen to this on my commute to work. Do you think I can count this as like towards my reading goal for the year? I don't know. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening. We appreciate it as always. This was a really fun thing for me to do, and I'm glad I was able to kind of wrap it up. And I hope that you guys enjoy. And as always, you can find us on the website formerly known as Twitter. You can email us with any questions, any comments, any concerns. I mean, this should be evidence for you. This was a request on Twitter that we finish Eye of Argon. So I did it because I want to do what people want. So if you have any thoughts for future episodes, or if there's anything else in this vein, like any kind of weird, it has to be public domain, because, I'm not going to sit here and read, copyrighted authors' works on air. But if you want to if you want to hear more of this type of stuff, then, any and all suggestions are welcome, because I really like the idea of reading. I would prefer, I think, for this audience, if it was kind of funny and stupid stuff. But really, anything that you think of, I think would be great. So, yeah, thanks again for listening. And all the information. Oh, and also, if you want to sign up for our Patreon, that's something that we really appreciate. And there are actually a few things in the works that could really help us with, which I think we'll announce or discuss on Twitter with you guys briefly or shortly. But anyway, all the information for that will also be in the show notes, but that is www.patreon.com/leftunread. And for those of you who subscribe, we appreciate it. And for those of you who are thinking about subscribing, if you are able to, we certainly appreciate that. So thanks again, and we will see you guys next time on another exciting edition of Left Unread.